I'm Elizabeth. I've lived 76 years on this earth, most of them with Paul by my side. Those were the good years, the happy years, when every day felt like a gift wrapped in laughter and love. But Paul's gone now, and it's just me. And to be honest, I'm not sure how to fill the space he left behind. I live in a small cottage on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. The house isn't much, but it's been home for the last 50 years. Paul built it with his hands, and I've filled it with memories, of raising our children, of birthdays, holidays, and quiet evenings by the fire. It's a cozy house. But lately, it's starting to feel more like a cage. The walls are closing in on me, and the silence that once brought me peace now weighs on me like a heavy blanket. I used to find comfort in my routine. I'd make my coffee in the morning, sit in the old wicker chair by the window, and watch the world wake up. I'd hum along to the radio, fold the laundry, and chat with the neighbors. But these days, even my quiet moments feel lonely. My children don't call as often as they used to. Leah, my daughter, has her own life now. And Eric, well, he only calls when he needs something. I feel it, the slow, insidious drift away from everything I've known. I don't want to burden them, but I feel like I'm disappearing from their lives. It's hard not to feel like I'm just taking up space, like I'm waiting for something that will never come. For something to change, Leah has been living with me for the past 5 years. Ever since her divorce, she's moved back to Asheville, bringing her 2 kids, Max and Ella, with her. At first, I was happy to have them all under one roof. The house felt fuller, and there was a liveliness that had been missing for so long. I could hear Max and Ella running around the house, their laughter filling the air. I could sit on the porch with Leah after a long day, chatting about life, the kids, the future. It felt like we were a family again. But the warmth of those early days has faded. Now, I feel like I'm just an extra. A fixture in the background, hardly noticed. Leah helps with things, she makes sure I take my pills, reminds me about doctor appointments, and handles the bills. But it's more of a business transaction than a mother-daughter relationship. I've become more of a responsibility to her than a loved one. Her attitude toward me has shifted. It's subtle, but it's there, woven into the way she speaks to me now. She talks to me like I'm a child, always correcting me, always reminding me of what I need to do. "Mom, don't forget to pay the electric bill this month," she'll say, her voice sharp, even though I've been paying the bills myself for the past 50 years. She doesn't even ask how I'm feeling anymore, not like she used to. Instead, it's always, "Mom, do you need anything? Are you okay?" But not in the way a daughter should care. It's more like a task she's ticking off her list. The only time she seems to show real concern is when something goes wrong with the house, or when there's money involved. "I think you should sell this place, Mom," she told me last week, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed, tapping her foot. "It's too much for you. You don't need all this space." I could feel the sting of her words even though she was only trying to be practical. The house may be big, but it's my home. My memories are tied up in these walls. Paul's laughter echoes in the rooms, and the kids' toys are still scattered in the attic. This house isn't just a building, it's where I've lived my life. But Leah doesn't see it that way. She's always been the pragmatic one. The one who sees things as they are, not how they once were. I get it. I know she's worried about me, that she wants what's best for me. But I wish she'd understand that sometimes, what's best for me isn't what's easiest for her. It's the same with Eric, my son. He lives far away in Atlanta, and we talk on the phone every now and then, but it's always the same. He asks for money, and when I say no, it's like I've committed some unforgivable crime. "Mom, I really need this loan," he'll say, the urgency in his voice making it sound like a life-or-death situation. "I just need a little help to get this business off the ground. You can spare it." I don't know what happened to my son. When he was younger, he used to be so full of ideas, so driven. But now, it feels like he's always in trouble. Like he's always one step away from failure. And yet, he never learns. He keeps asking for money, and I keep giving it to him. But every time I do, the resentment builds. Not just from him, but from me too. I've spent my whole life sacrificing for my children, making sure they had everything they needed, and yet, they can't seem to remember that I have needs too. That I matter. There's nothing worse than feeling invisible to your own children. I've given them everything I had, every last bit of my energy, my love, my time. And now, they seem to see me as nothing more than a resource. A bank they can tap into when they need something. Leah doesn't hesitate to remind me that I'm a burden either. She handles my finances now, and every time she mentions the costs of my care or how much it's all adding up, I feel a little more like I'm in the way. Mom, your insurance doesn't cover everything. You're costing us a lot of money. You have to realize that, she'll say, her tone as if I'm the one being selfish for needing medical care in my old age. It's like she's forgotten that I spent my whole life taking care of them, making sure they never wanted for anything. I worked hard to provide for our family. I raised them to be independent, to be strong. I did my part. But now, it feels like they're tired of me. Tired of looking after me, tired of having to remember I exist. Sometimes, I wonder if they ever really needed me in the first place. Maybe they were fine without me. Maybe they would have been better off if I'd just stayed in the background and let them take over. But that's not how I raised them. I was supposed to be their foundation. And now, they're letting me crumble, piece by piece, without even noticing. It all came to a head one afternoon, after one of those predictable calls from Eric. The tone in his voice was the same as always, urgent, pleading, almost desperate. His voice would rise and fall with the pitch of a man on the edge of something he couldn't control, as though his failure wasn't his fault, but the world's, or someone else's. He was always asking for help to keep his business afloat, help to cover his debts, help to get him out of yet another mess of his own making. Mom, I'm really in a tight spot right now. I know I've asked before, but this time is different. I just need a loan, just a few thousand to cover this big deal I'm closing. I'll pay you back, I swear, Eric said, his voice trembling slightly, like it always did when he was laying it on thick. I've heard that same line so many times that it's lost its meaning. But this time, for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to say yes, not this time. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle in my chest like a stone. I was tired, exhausted really, of being his safety net. Eric, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. I've helped you before, and every time, it ends the same way. You don't pay me back, and then you come back asking for more. I'm not a bank, son. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind as he tried to come up with the right words to spin it in his favor. He was always good at that, good at making me feel guilty, like it was somehow my fault that he was in trouble again. I get it, Mom. I do, Eric finally said, his tone softer now, almost apologetic. But I'm just trying to make something of myself. This business means everything to me. And I don't know who else to turn to. I could hear the manipulation in his voice, the way he was trying to tug at my heartstrings, but it didn't work this time. It used to, but not anymore. Eric, I've been there for you in the past, I said, my voice more firm now. But I've reached a point where I can't keep doing this. You're an adult, and you have to figure this out on your own. I can't keep putting my money into something that's only going to drag me down. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. There was another silence, but this one felt different. There was no plea, no attempt at persuasion. Instead, I heard the faintest sound of a sigh, like he'd just resigned himself to the truth. I understand, Mom, he said, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. I guess I'll just have to figure it out myself. That's right, I said, my throat tightening. You will. I hung up the phone, staring at the empty space in front of me. The silence in the house felt even heavier now. The conversation with Eric had been a long time coming, but it still stung. I wasn't angry with him, no, it was worse than that. I was disappointed. Disappointed that after all these years, he still couldn't see me as a person, as someone who had needs and desires beyond giving him money. But the true breaking point, the moment that really shattered me, came later that week. It was a Friday evening when Leah came into the kitchen, her face unreadable, as she placed a letter in front of me. I recognized the letterhead immediately. It was from the rental agency. Mom, I need to talk to you about the rent, Leah said, her voice clipped. I didn't need to ask what it was about. The letter was clear. The rent for the house I owned, the one I had inherited after Paul passed, had just gone up again. The rent had always been modest, just enough to cover the mortgage and a little extra for maintenance. But Leah had recently started asking for more, telling me it was necessary because of rising costs. The rent had doubled in the last few years, and it was starting to feel like a demand rather than a request. I'm not going to be able to keep up with this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though a lump was forming in my throat. I can't afford this increase. This is my house, Leah, not a property for you to use to get ahead. Leah's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in a way I knew too well. She was angry. But she didn't raise her voice. Instead, she crossed her arms and gave me a look that said it all. Mom, this is for your own good. You know I'm just looking out for you, right? The money from this house helps cover everything, and you can't just live here for free. I blinked, stunned. What do you mean, live here for free? This is my house, Leah. I've been paying the bills, maintaining it, for decades. She shrugged, unfazed. It's just the way things are now. You can't keep acting like you're still in charge, Mom. I'm the one taking care of everything. You need to accept that. The words hit me harder than I expected. I felt the sting of her dismissal, the way she'd brushed aside my concerns as if they were nothing. In that moment, I realized that my role in this family was slowly diminishing. I wasn't a mother or a contributor anymore, I was just a burden. You've been managing my finances for years, Leah, but that doesn't mean you get to decide what's best for me, I said, my voice trembling now. I'm not a child, and I'm certainly not a charity case. Leah's face darkened. I'm just trying to help you, Mom. You can't handle everything on your own anymore. It felt like a slap in the face. She was right in some ways. I wasn't as strong as I used to be, physically or emotionally. But I wasn't helpless. I still had a mind of my own, and I didn't need her taking control of everything. Maybe it's time you stop treating me like I'm incapable of taking care of myself, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not a burden, Leah. Not yet. She didn't respond. She just turned on her heel and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than ever. I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind swirling. How did I get here? How did I go from being the center of my family, the person they came to for comfort, advice, and love, to someone they felt justified in treating like an inconvenience? What happened to the children I raised, the ones who looked up to me for guidance? I thought about all the sacrifices I had made over the years. The hours I spent working to provide for them, the times I put my own dreams aside to make sure theirs came true. I remembered every birthday party I threw, every scraped knee I bandaged, every broken heart I mended. I remembered the late-night talks with Leah when she was a teenager, how I helped her through her first heartbreak. I remembered Eric's excitement when he got his first job out of college, how proud he was to finally be able to support himself. But now, it seemed like all those years of love and care didn't mean anything. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a responsibility. A bill to be paid. A problem to be fixed. The weight of it all pressed down on me, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly lost. I had spent my whole life taking care of others, but now there was no one to take care of me. And so, I did what I always did when I was overwhelmed. I made tea. The moment Leah uttered the words, "Pay the rent or get out," my chest tightened, and for the first time in a long while, I truly felt it, the sting of humiliation. It was as though all the love I had ever given her, all the support I had shown her throughout the years, had been completely erased in that one moment. I had spent my entire life caring for my family, putting them first in everything I did, and now, in her eyes, I wasn't even worthy of respect. I was just another thing to be managed, another expense to be controlled. I stared at her, a cold chill creeping into my bones. Her eyes didn't soften. She wasn't looking at me like a mother or even a person, she was looking at me like an object, like something that could be moved around, disposed of, or used until it had outlived its purpose. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat so tight it felt like it was choking me. "Leah," I started, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to steady it. "This is my house. I've lived here for over 30 years, and now you're telling me to pay rent? I don't understand. I've always taken care of this place. I've made sure everything is in order, every bill paid. You've always had everything you needed. And now, you're telling me to get out?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at me with that same hardened expression, arms crossed over her chest. It was like she was deciding whether or not she even cared enough to explain herself, to soften her words or give me any semblance of comfort. But I knew the truth. She didn't care. She was just playing her role in the family drama she had so carefully constructed. "Mom, I'm just saying that you can't keep living here for free. You're not getting any younger, and the house is too much for you to manage on your own. We're just trying to help you." "I'm helping you, but you need to contribute," she said, her voice clipped, sharp as a knife. That word, contribute, stung worse than any of her other words. The insinuation that I had stopped contributing, that I had somehow become a burden. My whole life, I had worked tirelessly to provide for my family, to make sure they wanted for nothing, and yet here I was, on the receiving end of an ultimatum. The realization hit me like a wave crashing over a cliff. I wasn't part of this family anymore, not really. I was just someone who had outlived her usefulness, someone who had overstayed her welcome. They didn't see me as a person with emotions, with feelings, with dignity. I was just an inconvenience they were tolerating until it was time to send me off, to dispose of me like an unwanted piece of furniture. I felt my face flush with anger, the blood rushing to my cheeks as my pulse quickened. It wasn't just the words she said. It was the way she said them, the way she made me feel small, insignificant. And in that moment, something inside me broke. The years of quietly enduring their neglect, their indifference, it all boiled over. I stood up suddenly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You think I don't know what you're doing, Leah?" I said, my voice shaking now, but firm. "I know exactly what this is about. You've been slowly pushing me out for years, and now you're justifying it by telling me I have to pay rent. This house was built by your father and me. It's mine, not yours. You can't just take it from me." She didn't flinch. Not even a little. Instead, she rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the one making things difficult. "Mom, you're being dramatic. I'm just trying to help," she said dismissively, already turning toward the door. "If you can't see that, I don't know what else to tell you." And with that, she left. Just like that, she left. I stood there, frozen, as the sound of her footsteps faded away down the hall. She didn't care. She didn't care that I was hurt, that I felt betrayed, that I was a person with emotions, with a past, with a lifetime of memories wrapped up in this house. No, to her, I was just another expense. Another responsibility to be controlled. The tears came then, silent and unbidden. I didn't cry for long, but the ache in my chest was unbearable. I felt like I had been stripped of everything, my dignity, my purpose, my sense of belonging. I wasn't just alone in that moment. I was invisible. I thought about my son, Eric, and how he had called earlier that week, his usual request for money hanging heavily in the air between us. I had said no, for the first time in a long time, and he had responded with that same distant, almost indifferent tone. He didn't care either. Not really. They never did. I had given everything for them, and they had taken it all, expecting more, but never giving back. As the evening wore on, I felt a strange emptiness, a hollow space where love and connection used to reside. I thought about Paul, about how he used to sit at the kitchen table, his arms wide, ready to embrace me after a long day. I missed the warmth of his presence, his steadying hand, his laughter that filled every room. Without him, this house felt cold and distant. Without him, I felt forgotten. I wandered to the living room, where I had spent so many nights sitting beside him, talking about everything and nothing. The room seemed to mock me now, as if reminding me that it was once filled with life, with warmth, with love. And now, it was empty. Silent. I sat down on the couch and picked up a photo frame from the coffee table, one of Paul and me at our wedding, young and full of promise. It seemed like another lifetime, a lifetime I could never get back. The ache in my chest deepened, and I closed my eyes, willing the tears to stop. But they came anyway. I had given so much of myself to my family, to my children, to my husband. And now, I had nothing left to give. They had taken everything. And when I needed them most, when I needed their love, their care, their understanding, they were gone. The final blow came the next morning when Leah came back, her eyes cold and unfeeling. She didn't apologize, didn't show an ounce of remorse for the way she had spoken to me. Instead, she handed me a check, the inflated rent she had demanded. "I expect this by the end of the month," she said. Her words were final. No room for negotiation. No space for understanding. I took the check, my fingers numb, and without saying a word, I walked out of the room. The house felt even more foreign to me then. Each room, once filled with life, now felt like a tomb. The walls, the furniture, even the air seemed to judge me. I had lived here for over 30 years, and yet in this moment, I was a stranger. My own family had turned me into something unwanted, something expendable. The love I had poured into this home, into them, was now a distant memory, something I couldn't grasp anymore. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter. The morning sun poured in through the window, casting a warm glow on everything. But it wasn't enough to chase away the cold that had settled in my bones. I could hear the distant sound of Leah moving around upstairs, the creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. It felt like I was living in a different world, one where I no longer belonged. I had given everything for this family, and they had turned their backs on me. It wasn't just the money, the rent, the bills, it was the way they had treated me like a burden, like something to be discarded when it no longer served its purpose. I walked to the door, my hand resting on the handle, but I didn't open it. I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't going to let them chase me out, not without a fight. But what kind of fight could I wage against this? Against a family that had already made up its mind? The door remained closed, and I stayed there, rooted to the spot, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The morning after Leah handed me that check, the weight of everything settled heavily on me. The anger, the disappointment, and the sting of humiliation swirled together, leaving me feeling both exhausted and strangely detached. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the check she had given me, my fingers absently tracing the edge of the paper. I had been given no choice but to pay or leave, no room for discussion, no space for negotiation. But something inside me snapped. Something deep down that had been simmering for years finally boiled over. I had spent my entire life putting everyone else first, my children, my husband, the house, the bills, everything, but what about me? What about my needs? My desires? I had lost myself in the process of being everything to everyone, and now, here I was, nothing more than a shadow in my own life. But that was about to change. The idea began to form slowly, like a seed planted in the back of my mind, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't have to live like this. I didn't have to put up with being dismissed, belittled, and treated like I was invisible. I had spent my whole life creating a family, a home, a life. And it was time for me to reclaim it. Time for me to take control of my future. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window, staring out at the front yard. The trees were swaying in the breeze, and the sun shone brightly on the grass, but all I could see were the memories of Paul, of my children growing up, of the life we had built here. This house had been my sanctuary, the place where I had poured my love, my energy, my heart. But now, it felt like a prison built by my own hands. It was time to leave. The thought hit me like a rush of adrenaline. I could feel the blood pulsing in my veins, my heart beating faster as the decision took root in my mind. I was no longer going to wait around for them to realize my worth. I wasn't going to stay here and be treated like a burden any longer. I wasn't going to let my family's disregard for me define the rest of my life. If they wanted to push me out, then I would leave. But I would leave on my terms. I went to my bedroom and opened the closet, staring at the rows of clothes hanging neatly on the racks. For so long, I had lived for others. I had dressed for others, cooked for others, cleaned for others. It had always been about them. But now, it was time for me to think about what I wanted. I pulled out a small suitcase from the bottom of the closet and began to pack. I wasn't sure where I was going yet, but I knew I needed to go somewhere. Somewhere far away from the suffocating expectations, the pressure, and the guilt. I walked through the house, gathering a few things, some clothes, a few photos of Paul, and the old letters I had kept from when my children were young. I didn't need to take much. I didn't want to carry anything heavy, anything that tied me down. It was time for me to start over. I was tired of carrying the weight of the past, of all the things that had been expected of me. I was ready for a new chapter. When I finished packing, I stood in the living room for a long moment, taking it all in one last time. The room was empty now, devoid of life. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum, a relic of a time that had passed. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. I walked out the door, leaving the key on the kitchen counter. As I stepped out into the yard, I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. It felt different, somehow. Like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was free. But even as I walked away, I knew there would be challenges ahead. There was no denying that. But I wasn't going to let fear stop me. I wasn't going to let the years of neglect and abandonment dictate my future. I was ready to face whatever came next, ready to take control of my life and make it my own again. The first thing I did was head to the bank. I withdrew some money, enough to get by for a while, and closed my accounts. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need their control, their demands, their expectations. I was no longer a prisoner to their whims. I was taking back my independence. The next step was selling the house. It wasn't an easy decision. This house had been my life, my sanctuary, for so many years. But it had also become a symbol of everything I had sacrificed for my family, everything I had given up for them. It was time to let go. Time to let go of the past and step into the future. I called a real estate agent and made arrangements to sell the house. It was a bittersweet moment, but I knew it was the right one. I wasn't going to wait around anymore. I wasn't going to be trapped in a house that no longer felt like home. I was going to move on. After that, I found a small apartment in the heart of Asheville. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was quiet and cozy, just the way I liked it. I didn't need anything extravagant. I just needed peace, and that's exactly what I found there. I decorated it with a few old pieces of furniture that I had kept, and it felt good. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a space that was truly mine. I started focusing on my health. I made appointments with doctors I hadn't seen in years and began to take care of myself. I walked in the park every morning, breathing in the fresh air and feeling the sun on my face. I felt alive again. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a future. I didn't have to wait for my children to take care of me. I could take care of myself. I found joy in the little things. Reading books that I had always wanted to read but never had time for. Listening to music that made me smile. Cooking meals that I actually enjoyed. I started to reconnect with myself in ways I hadn't thought possible. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living. For the first time in a long time, I was in control of my life. And that freedom, it was priceless. Far more valuable than any amount of money. But even as I embraced my new life, I knew there would be challenges ahead. There would be times when I would miss my children, when I would feel the ache of loneliness creep in. But I would face those moments with strength, because I knew that I was no longer defined by their expectations. I was defined by me. And that was enough. One day, I was sitting in my new apartment, sipping a cup of tea, when the phone rang. It was Leah. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, unsure whether to answer. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue living in my newfound peace. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. If I was going to live my life on my own terms, I had to face this. I answered the phone. "Mom," Leah said, her voice tentative. "I just wanted to check in on you. See how you're doing." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I wasn't going to be angry anymore. I wasn't going to let her words control me. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. "Better than I've been in a long time." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could tell she didn't know what to say. She had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of our relationship. Now, the tables had turned. I wasn't going to beg for her approval. I wasn't going to beg for her love. "Good," she said finally, her voice sounding strained. "Good. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm more than okay," I replied. "I'm finally living for me." The words felt powerful as I said them, like I was reclaiming something I had lost. Leah didn't respond for a moment. "I'll talk to you soon, Mom," she said, and then hung up. I put the phone down, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life again. I wasn't just a footnote in my family's story anymore. I was the author of my own story. And that was a freedom I would never give up. The transformation wasn't immediate, and it wasn't always easy, but I could feel the changes creeping in slowly. For so long, I had been defined by my role in the family: mother, wife, caretaker. And yet, as I sat in my new apartment in downtown Asheville, the sunlight streaming in through the window, I realized that I had no role anymore. I wasn't someone's mom or someone's wife. I was just me, Elizabeth. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I spent my first weeks in the apartment adjusting to the silence. The hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building's old walls were the only sounds that filled the space. It was different from the constant noise and bustle of the house I had lived in for so long. But as I sat in my cozy living room, surrounded by my own things, I started to feel a sense of peace. It was as if the weight of years of unspoken expectations and quiet resentments had finally been lifted off my shoulders. I found myself rediscovering old hobbies I had abandoned years ago. I began knitting again, the rhythmic movement of the needles calming my mind. I had once made Paul a sweater, and even though he wasn't here to wear it anymore, the act of knitting felt like a small way of honoring him. It was also a way of reconnecting with myself. I could remember the days when knitting was my sanctuary, a quiet corner of the world where I could think, create, and find solace. I also started reading again. Not just the books that piled up beside my bed for years, but books I had long forgotten. Novels, history books, poetry. I lost myself in the pages, remembering how much I had loved books as a young woman. I started journaling too, writing down my thoughts at night before bed. It wasn't always easy, and some nights I would find myself stuck for words. But it helped me process everything: the anger, the hurt, the sadness, the loneliness. Writing gave me a way to externalize all the emotions that had been bottled up inside for so long. And then there was the walking. Every morning, I would walk through the nearby park, the cool air on my face, the scent of the grass and trees filling my senses. I would walk for miles, taking in the beauty around me. The world felt vast, and I felt small and insignificant in the best possible way. There was something humbling about nature. It reminded me that the world would keep turning, whether or not I was in control. And for a long time, I had needed control. But now, walking through the park, I realized that letting go of that need wasn't as scary as I once thought. I didn't have to control everything anymore. I could simply be. One morning, while walking by the small pond near the park, I saw a mother duck and her ducklings. The sight brought a smile to my face. It was such a simple, beautiful moment, one I had nearly forgotten to appreciate in all the years of living with stress and worry. But now, as I watched the ducklings waddle along behind their mother, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I didn't have children at home anymore, and I didn't have a husband to share these moments with. But I had the ability to appreciate them, and that felt powerful. It was a quiet reminder that beauty could still be found in the smallest of moments. I had never thought of myself as someone who could find joy in solitude. But here I was, finding peace in the quiet, enjoying my own company. I had spent so many years feeling lonely even when I was surrounded by my family, always putting their needs first and pushing my own aside. But now, in this little apartment, I was learning that being alone didn't have to mean being lonely. It could mean freedom. There were times when loneliness crept in, of course. There were evenings when I would sit by the window, looking out at the world, wishing I had someone to share it with. I missed the sound of Paul's laugh, the way he would sit on the couch with me after a long day, talking about everything and nothing. But even in those moments of loneliness, I knew that I had made the right decision. I wasn't going to wait for anyone else to take care of me. I was going to do it myself. As the weeks turned into months, I began to take better care of myself physically as well. I scheduled regular doctor's appointments, making sure I was keeping up with my health. I hadn't always been good at taking care of my own well-being. There was always something else to do, someone else to care for. But now, I was putting myself first. I wasn't going to wait for anyone else to take care of me. I could take care of myself. I started cooking again too, but this time, I cooked for myself. It wasn't about feeding a family or making sure everyone else had what they needed. It was about nourishing myself, both physically and emotionally. I found joy in cooking meals that I actually enjoyed, meals that reflected my own tastes, not the tastes of my children or Paul. I made the meals I had always wanted to make, from simple pasta dishes to hearty stews. I enjoyed the act of preparing the food, taking my time, and savoring every bite. It was something small, but it was mine. I also began to explore Asheville more. I visited the local shops, wandered through the farmers market, and took myself to the movies. I went to the library, where I spent hours browsing the shelves, picking up books I never would have looked at before. I was learning to enjoy life again, to appreciate the small pleasures that had once seemed so far out of reach. One afternoon, while I was at the library, I struck up a conversation with an older woman who was sitting near me. Her name was Ruth, and she was a retired teacher who had lived in Asheville for most of her life. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our pasts and our families. Ruth had been widowed for many years, and we both found comfort in our shared experiences. She invited me to join her book club, and I hesitated at first. But then I thought, why not? It was another step toward building a new life, a life outside of the roles I had once been confined to. That evening, I returned to my apartment, my heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something again, something that was just for me. I had friends, new experiences, and the freedom to live my life the way I wanted. I wasn't a burden anymore. I wasn't waiting around for anyone to validate me. I was validating myself. I also started volunteering at the local community center. I had always enjoyed helping others, and now I had the time to do so. The work wasn't difficult, helping out with events, organizing materials, and just being present for the people who came in, but it gave me a sense of purpose. It reminded me that I still had something to offer the world. I wasn't just a forgotten woman in the background of my family's life. I was someone who could contribute, someone who could make a difference. My volunteer work led to other opportunities. I started helping with the local food bank, organizing donations, and packing meals for those who needed them. There was something incredibly fulfilling about it. It felt good to be giving again, to be part of something that was bigger than just me. I didn't have to be someone's mother or wife to be important. I was important because I was contributing, because I was making a difference. But the most profound change came within myself. I began to see myself in a new light. I wasn't just a woman who had been left behind by her family. I wasn't just someone who had been cast aside. I was a whole person. I was worthy of respect and love, not because of my role as a mother or wife, but because of who I was. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was enough. I walked through the streets of Asheville with a newfound confidence. I smiled at strangers, and they smiled back. I found joy in the simple moments, in the way the sunlight flickered through the leaves, in the taste of a hot cup of tea, in the sound of laughter in the distance. And I realized something: I wasn't alone anymore. I was surrounded by a community of people who saw me for who I was. Not as a mother, not as a wife, but as Elizabeth. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. A few weeks after I had moved into my apartment, things started to settle. I began feeling the first glimmers of peace, though the undercurrent of loneliness occasionally crept in. The days were quieter than I'd ever experienced, but they were mine to fill with whatever I chose. I woke up in the morning to sunlight pouring through my window, unhurried and free. I took time with breakfast, read, and walked through the park. I was making a life for myself again. Then came the phone call from Leah. I had been expecting it, though I wasn't sure when it would come. Part of me had hoped it would never happen, but the other part knew better. A mother's absence is a hard thing to ignore for long, especially when the absence is so profound, so final. I had left, but my children hadn't truly let me go. At least not yet. The call came in the middle of the afternoon. I had just finished a walk through the park, my head full of new ideas and possibilities for a future I hadn't considered before. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling me. It was Leah. For a moment, I hesitated. It was strange. For all the times I had dreamed of this moment, of them reaching out to me, I found myself frozen. But I knew I had to answer. I couldn't hide forever. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had to face it. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice even, steady. "Mom," Leah's voice was softer than I expected, hesitant. I've been thinking. A lot. I know we haven't spoken much since you left, but I wanted to check on you. To see how you're doing." Her words took me by surprise. There was a gentleness there that I hadn't heard in her voice in years. It was like she was finally seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in ages. "I'm doing okay, Leah," I replied slowly. "Better than I've been in a long time." I could hear the sigh on the other end of the line, a sound of relief mixed with something else, guilt, maybe. "I'm glad to hear that. I know I haven't been the best daughter. I've been focused on a lot of things, but I should have made more of an effort to understand what you were going through. I should have been there for you." Her words, her honesty, hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. They were just words, but they held so much weight. I could feel the years of frustration, the years of quiet resentment between us, dissolve, if only for a moment. But the past couldn't be erased. The years of neglect couldn't just vanish in one conversation. "Leah," I said, trying to hold my ground while still being open to what she was offering. "You don't need to apologize. What's done is done. I made the decision to leave, and I'm at peace with it now. But it wasn't easy. And it wasn't just about the rent or the house. It was about everything, how I was treated, how I felt invisible. It's hard when the people you love don't seem to see you at all." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. I could tell Leah was trying to absorb what I had said, trying to find the right words, but they didn't come immediately. "I know," she finally said, her voice cracking a little. "I've been so wrapped up in my own life, I didn't realize how much I was taking you for granted. I'm sorry for that." I swallowed hard, my throat thick with emotion. "You're right," I said softly. "But I've learned something too. I learned that I matter. I can't just be there for everyone else and forget about myself. I've spent too many years doing that." Leah was quiet for a long time. Then, after a deep breath, she spoke again, her tone more deliberate now. "I've been thinking about what you said. And I don't want things to stay the way they are. I miss you, Mom. I want to try to rebuild our relationship. I know it's going to take time, but I'm willing to try. Are you?" It was a question I hadn't expected, but in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need them to define my happiness anymore. I didn't need their approval. I had built my life, and I was strong enough to make my own decisions. But as much as I had learned to live for myself, I couldn't deny the part of me that still longed for connection, for the family I had spent so much of my life nurturing. I'm willing to try too, Leah, I said, my voice soft but firm. But it has to be different. We can't go back to the way things were. We need to respect each other's boundaries, understand each other better. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm just asking for understanding. Her voice brightened at my words. I can do that, Mom. I really can. And I'm sorry for everything. I know it wasn't fair to you. We talked for a while longer, each of us tentatively putting the pieces of our broken relationship back together, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. There was still a lot of hurt between us, a lot of years that couldn't be undone. But I felt something shift, something genuine in Leah's voice that made me believe, maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us. Not the same kind of hope I had once clung to, but a new kind, a more mature, more understanding hope that acknowledged both the past and the present. A few days later, Eric called. I was less prepared for his call, less willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't sure what his intentions were, whether he had finally realized that I wasn't an endless well of money, or if he was simply looking for another loan. But I answered the phone anyway, determined to face this head-on. Mom, Eric said, his voice tentative. I heard about what happened with Leah. And I've been thinking. A lot. I wanted to check in on you, to see how you're doing. His words surprised me, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I'm doing fine, Eric. Better than I've been in a long time. I'm glad, he said, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable. I know things have been rough between us. I haven't exactly been the son you deserved. And I'm sorry for that. I was silent for a long time, processing his words. For so long, I had been angry at Eric. His constant requests for money, his lack of consideration for me, it had pushed me to the edge. But hearing him apologize, hearing the genuine remorse in his voice, I realized something. I wasn't the only one who had been hurting. He had been hurting too, in his own way. Eric, I said carefully, I appreciate your apology. But you need to understand something. I can't keep giving you money. I can't be the one you turn to every time things get tough. I want to help you, but not at the cost of my own peace. I know, Mom. I understand. And I don't expect you to just fix everything for me anymore. I've been stupid, and I know it. I don't want you to feel like you have to carry me anymore. It was a small step, but it was progress. We didn't fix everything in one conversation, and I didn't expect to, but the sincerity in his voice gave me hope. Hope that things might be different this time. Hope that, with time, we could find a new way of relating to each other, one that didn't revolve around money or expectation. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter. The conversation had been difficult, but it had opened a door. I didn't know where it would lead, but I was willing to walk through it, one step at a time. I didn't expect the reconciliation to be easy or fast. I knew that healing old wounds would take time, and that there would be bumps along the way. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of possibility that I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. My family wasn't perfect. We were far from it. But there was hope. And hope, even if it was fragile, was all I needed to begin again. In the weeks that followed, Leah and I met a few times for lunch, taking small steps toward rebuilding the trust that had been broken. We laughed, reminisced, and learned to listen to each other in a way we hadn't done in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was progress. As the weeks passed, something unexpected began to stir inside me. At first, I thought it was just the thrill of newfound independence. I had already started to heal from the wounds that had been inflicted on me, but I hadn't realized just how deep the scars went. My interactions with Leah and Eric were growing more frequent, and though they were filled with the potential for healing, they were also triggering. The old patterns we had slipped into before still lingered, like ghosts in the corners of my mind. The need for control, the expectations that had always been there, these things were so deeply embedded in my relationship with them that I couldn't simply ignore them. One day, while sitting in my favorite cafe downtown, I realized how much my new life had transformed me, but also how fragile that transformation was. I was no longer the woman who had silently sacrificed herself for everyone else. I had already started to live for myself, but I realized that wasn't enough. I had to keep reinforcing that change. There was still work to be done. I was free, yes, but I needed to secure that freedom by asserting it, by standing my ground when old patterns threatened to creep back in. I wasn't going to be the passive recipient of others' demands any longer. I had spent so many years quietly enduring the subtle manipulations of my family, letting them make decisions for me, letting them push me into the background, all for the sake of maintaining peace. But peace, I had learned, wasn't worth the cost of my soul. The price of peace had been my own sense of self. That afternoon, I made a decision. I wasn't going to go back to being that woman. I wasn't going to hide behind the facade of being helpful or accommodating if it meant sacrificing my own happiness, my own peace. I had spent so many years shaping my identity based on what others needed from me. Now, it was time to define myself by my own terms, to take control and say what I needed, what I wanted, and what I would no longer tolerate. The next phone call was from Leah. It had been a week since our last conversation, and I had been reflecting on how easy it had been for her to slip back into old patterns, expecting things from me, taking without asking. And when I answered the phone this time, I was ready to assert my position. "Hi, Mom, how's everything?" Leah asked, her tone still warm but carrying the undertone of expectation, the feeling that I was still, somehow, responsible for everything. "I'm doing well, Leah," I said, keeping my voice calm, steady. "But I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, and I want to be clear with you about something." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her preparing for a conversation she wasn't sure she was ready for. "I'm listening," Leah said, her voice guarded now. "I've been thinking a lot about how our relationship has been, about how things were when I lived with you. And I have to tell you, I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to be in a position where I'm made to feel like I'm a burden. I'm not a burden, and I won't allow myself to be treated like one anymore. I need you to understand that." There was silence for a moment. I couldn't tell if Leah was hurt or angry, or if she was simply processing what I had said. But I could feel my heart race as I waited for her response. I had never spoken to her like this before, never asserted myself in this way. I had always been the one to accommodate, to bend, to keep the peace. But this time, I was standing firm. "Mom," Leah finally said, her voice softer, more uncertain. "I didn't realize you felt that way. I thought I was helping you. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I know you were trying to help, Leah. But you weren't listening to me. You were treating me like I was incapable of making decisions for myself, like I needed you to tell me what to do. I understand you wanted to help, but I'm not a child anymore, and I don't need someone to take care of me." I could feel the air between us shift. It was as if I had just told her something she wasn't prepared to hear. The weight of it hung in the silence. "I understand," Leah said finally. "I do. And I'm sorry. I really am. I guess I was just trying to make sure everything was okay. I didn't realize I was smothering you. I know you didn't mean to smother me, Leah. But it's important that you understand something. I'm okay. I can take care of myself. And I want to live my life on my own terms now. I need you to respect that. I need you to respect me." There was another pause, but this one wasn't as heavy. This time, it was Leah taking it all in, processing the shift in our relationship. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with reassurance. I had said what I needed to say, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. "I respect that, Mom," Leah said finally. "I'll do better. I promise." I didn't realize how much I was still trying to control things. "I've been so focused on everything else, I forgot to consider your needs, your wants. But I'll try harder. I'll give you the space you need." I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. Leah was listening. She was hearing me, for the first time in a long time. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice softening. "And I'm here if you ever need me. But this is a partnership now, not a hierarchy. I'm not here to be your responsibility. I'm here to share my life with you." The conversation ended on a better note than I had expected. There was a mutual understanding between us now. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy to shift the dynamics we had established over the years. But I felt empowered. For the first time in a long time, I felt heard. Later that week, Eric called. I had known this call was coming. He had reached out to Leah after our conversation, and I could feel the tension building. The last time we had spoken, it had been about money. About his need for help with his business, his constant demand for financial support. But this time, it felt different. There was a vulnerability in his voice, a softness that hadn't been there before. "Mom," Eric said, his voice tentative. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About how I've been treating you. I want to apologize. I know I've asked you for money too many times. I know it's been unfair. I felt a pang of sadness in my chest. Eric had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in my eyes. But somewhere along the way, he had become lost in his own ambition and selfishness. This apology was long overdue. I'm glad you're hearing me, Eric, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But you need to understand that I can't keep giving you money. I can't keep rescuing you. You have to take responsibility for your own life. I'll always love you, but I can't be the one to fix everything. I know, Mom. I understand. And I don't expect you to just fix everything for me anymore. I've been stupid, and I know it. I don't want you to feel like you have to carry me anymore. It was a small step, but it was progress. We didn't fix everything in one conversation, and I didn't expect to, but the sincerity in his voice gave me hope. Hope that things might be different this time. Hope that, with time, we could find a new way of relating to each other, one that didn't revolve around money or expectation. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter. The conversation had been difficult, but it had opened a door. I didn't know where it would lead, but I was willing to walk through it, one step at a time. I didn't expect the reconciliation to be easy or fast. I knew that healing old wounds would take time, and that there would be bumps along the way. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of possibility that I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. My family wasn't perfect. We were far from it. But there was hope. And hope, even if it was fragile, was all I needed to begin again. In the weeks that followed, Leah and I met a few times for lunch, taking small steps toward rebuilding the trust that had been broken. We laughed, reminisced, and learned to listen to each other in a way we hadn't done in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was progress. The weeks that followed my conversations with Leah and Eric were a whirlwind of self-reflection, change, and adaptation. There was no denying that my relationships with my children had shifted. I was still their mother, of course, but I had stepped into a new role, one that wasn't dependent on their approval, their needs, or their demands. It was a role where I could simply be, without the pressure of expectation weighing down on me. And for the first time in many years, I was beginning to see that perhaps, just perhaps, this new reality wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. But even with the progress I had made, the sense of peace I had cultivated in my small apartment, there were moments when doubts crept in. There were moments when I would look at my phone and wonder if I should call Leah or Eric, just to check in, to make sure they were okay. They were my children, after all. There was a natural impulse to want to be there for them, to make sure they didn't feel abandoned, as I had once feared. But the truth was, I had already given them everything I had, my time, my energy, my love, and it hadn't been enough. It wasn't a bitter realization, it was simply the truth. They were grown now, capable of standing on their own, just as I had stood on my own when I was their age. I had to stop pretending that my role as their caretaker, their emotional anchor, was the only thing that defined me. It was a hard thing to accept, and for days I wrestled with it. What did it mean to be a mother when your children no longer needed you in the same way? Was I still relevant in their lives if I wasn't the one managing their finances or solving their problems? Was I still a mother if I wasn't constantly pouring myself into their needs? The answer came to me one morning as I sat in the park, watching the sun rise over the trees. I had my journal open in my lap, the pen in my hand, but no words were coming to me. I watched as a couple jogged by, laughing, holding hands. There was a young father pushing a stroller, his face full of joy as he looked down at his baby. I watched the life around me, people living their lives, making their own choices, facing their own challenges, and I realized something profound. I was one of them now. I had spent so much of my life identifying as a mother, a wife, a caretaker. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that I was Elizabeth. Just Elizabeth. And that was enough. I didn't need to be anyone else. I didn't need to justify my existence through the roles I had played for others. I was enough because I was me, and I had every right to live for myself now. And that was when I made my final decision. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going back to being the person I had been before, the person who had molded herself around the needs of others. I wasn't going back to a life where my worth was measured by my ability to give, to sacrifice, to be the one everyone depended on. I was going forward. The realization settled into my bones like a comforting weight. It wasn't a dramatic shift. It wasn't a sudden decision that would radically alter my world in one fell swoop. It was a quiet, steadfast declaration that I was going to take control of my life, that I wasn't going to be swept along by the expectations of my family, or the feelings of guilt that had haunted me for so long. I didn't need to go back to my old life in that house. I didn't need to go back to the role I had always played. I needed to keep moving forward, embracing this new version of myself, a version that was defined not by my relationship to others, but by my relationship with myself. The first step was clear. I needed to let go of the house. I called the realtor and confirmed my decision to sell. The process was surprisingly emotional, but I knew it was the right choice. The house had been a part of me for so many years, a symbol of the life I had built with Paul, a life that had been filled with laughter, love, and moments of quiet joy. But it was also a symbol of all the things I had sacrificed for the sake of others, the compromises I had made that had slowly chipped away at my sense of self. I wasn't ready to return to that life. I had made peace with the memories, but the house was a reminder of the person I used to be. It was time for me to step into something new, something that didn't carry the weight of old expectations. The sale of the house went smoothly, and once the papers were signed, I felt a surprising sense of relief. It was like I had cut the final thread that tied me to the past. I was free. And with that freedom came the realization that I could truly begin again. But there was still the matter of my family, the people who had shaped my life in ways both beautiful and painful. The relationship with Leah and Eric had improved, but there was still so much to work through. I knew that, in order for us to truly rebuild, I had to keep my boundaries intact. I couldn't go back to the way things had been, where I was expected to solve their problems or take on responsibilities that weren't mine to bear. I started to put more effort into building my life independently. I didn't just want a life of solitude, I wanted a life filled with purpose, filled with people who saw me as I was, not as someone they could use to fix their issues. I took classes at the community center, exploring interests I had long since abandoned, painting, gardening, even learning to play the ukulele. I joined social groups, reconnected with old friends, and met new people who weren't tied to the role I had once played in my family. It was a slow process, and there were times when I doubted myself, when I felt the old fears creep in, the fears that told me I wasn't enough, that I wasn't worthy of the new life I was trying to build. But each time those fears surfaced, I reminded myself, I was doing this for me. I didn't need anyone else's approval. I didn't need anyone's validation. I had already proven to myself that I could stand on my own. And the more I lived for myself, the more I began to understand the depth of the changes that had taken place within me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I wasn't just an old woman clinging to the remnants of a past life. I was a woman who was actively building a future, one that was hers to shape. There were times when I thought about Leah and Eric, times when I missed the idea of family, when I longed for the connection we once shared. But the distance between us no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like space, space for both of us to grow, to learn, to find new ways of relating to each other. The truth was, I had spent so many years giving everything I had to others, but now, it was my turn to take something for myself. And I wasn't going to apologize for it. I had made my decision. The past was gone, and the future was waiting. It was time for me to live for me. And that was enough. I had come a long way since the days when I was tethered to my past, bound by the expectations of my family, weighed down by the guilt of not being enough. I had spent so many years living for others, giving my time, my love, and my energy to my children, to my husband, and to the house I had built. But as the years had passed, I had lost myself in the process. I had become a shadow of the person I once was, always the caretaker, always the fixer, always the one who put everyone else's needs before my own. And now, sitting here in my small apartment, the sunlight spilling over the worn pages of the books on my shelves, I realized just how far I had come. I had reclaimed myself. I had finally found my voice, my strength, and my independence. I had let go of the past, cut the ties that had bound me to the life I had once known, and opened myself up to a new chapter. But it wasn't just about leaving my old life behind. It was about embracing who I was now. The woman who had walked out of that house was not the same woman who had walked into it all those years ago. I had shed the old skin, the one that had been marked by sacrifice, by self-doubt, by the quiet desperation to be loved and needed. I was no longer defined by my role as a mother, as a wife, or as a caretaker. I was defined by who I was, Elizabeth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. It was strange, though, the way this freedom settled over me. It wasn't the kind of freedom that came with wild abandon, with rushing off into the sunset. It was quieter than that. It was a deep, peaceful kind of freedom, the kind that came with knowing that I was finally living life on my own terms, that I had given up nothing to claim my right to exist in the world without apology. It wasn't easy. There were days when I still felt the ache of loneliness, when the quiet of the apartment felt almost suffocating. But I no longer feared it. The silence wasn't a threat, it was a space that I could fill with whatever I wanted. I could read, I could write, I could walk through the park and watch the world go by. I could make connections with people who appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could give them. I could be present in my own life. And there were moments, too, when I thought about Leah and Eric. I thought about how they had been so distant in recent years, how they had seemed to only reach out when they needed something from me. And even though we had begun to mend our relationship, there was still a sense of distance between us, a distance that wasn't just physical but emotional. The old roles we had played were hard to break free from, and there was no guarantee that they would ever understand why I had made the choices I did. But I had come to terms with that. I couldn't control their reactions, and I couldn't force them to see things the way I did. But I could control my own life, and I could choose to live it without the burden of their expectations. When I thought about my children, I no longer felt the sting of rejection. The absence of their need for me, for my guidance and my care, no longer felt like abandonment. It had, in fact, become a source of strength. They were grown now, and I had to let them go. I had to trust that they would make their way in the world without me always stepping in to help. And though it had been painful, I realized it was the only way they could truly find their own path. I couldn't be the safety net forever. I had to be my own safety net. The realization was both liberating and bittersweet. The life I had envisioned for myself, the one in which I was needed and valued by my children, was no longer the reality. But that didn't mean I wasn't needed at all. I was needed by me. I was needed by the friends I was making, by the community I was building, by the life I was creating from scratch. And that, I had come to understand, was enough. I didn't need to be constantly needed by my family to feel fulfilled. I could fill that space with things that were meaningful to me. The changes I had made in my life were not just about leaving behind a toxic situation or freeing myself from the constraints of others' expectations. They were about finding the courage to be alone with myself, to confront the parts of me that had been buried for years, and to rediscover the things that had once brought me joy. It wasn't just about cutting ties, it was about reconnecting with my own soul. The decision to live for myself was one I would never regret. Yes, it had come at a cost, there were sacrifices, there were tears, and there were moments when I thought about turning back. But every step I had taken, no matter how small, had been one toward my true self. And that had made all the difference. Over time, I realized that my transformation was not a one-time event, but a continuous process. Each day, I was learning something new about myself. I was discovering new passions, new interests, new ways of being in the world. I had begun to write again, something I had abandoned years ago in the rush of raising children and caring for a household. I began to take on small projects, like creating a garden in the small courtyard outside my apartment. It wasn't a grand endeavor, but it was something that brought me joy. I spent hours tending to the plants, watching them grow, and finding peace in the simple act of caring for something that didn't ask for anything in return. One day, I sat down with a cup of tea and reflected on all that had happened. I looked around my apartment, at the pictures on the walls, the books stacked by my bedside, the small plants sitting on the windowsill. This was my life now, and it was more than I had ever dreamed it could be. It was mine, and I had built it from nothing. I had started over, and I had done it on my own terms. It wasn't perfect, but perfection had never been the goal. The goal had always been peace. The goal had always been freedom. And I had found both, in my own way, in my own time. I thought back to the days when I had felt lost and small, when I had believed that my value came from my role in my family. I thought about the years I had spent feeling like a burden, always trying to do more, give more, be more. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was Elizabeth, just Elizabeth, and that was enough. I didn't need anyone else to validate me. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worthy. I had already done that for myself. And so, I moved forward, one step at a time, with confidence and with grace. There would always be challenges, of course, but I knew now that I had the strength to face them. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Truly living. And that was all I needed.